Well, standing right here is Mr. David Thomas, CEO of Think Global Consulting. David Thomas is a speaker, entrepreneur and facilitator, and as I said, the CEO of Think Global Consulting. He is well known in the Asia Pacific region for his experience, credibility and passion for identifying, building and facilitating business and investment relationships between developed and emerging countries. David is also the Vice President of the Australia-China Business Council for New South Wales, an organisation that ACYA is involved with from time to time, and is well qualified to provide his audience, us, with skills in developing global networks, managing cross-cultural relationships, and engaging with business leaders in emerging countries. If everyone could welcome Mr. David Thomas. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Carolyn Hong. Carolyn Hong is a leading industry expert in the Australia-Asia sphere, with over 30 years of experience and holding many key positions in various trade organisations and companies. She is the CEO of Carolyn Hong Asia Australia, president of both China and Asia HR, Human Resources Australia. With a wealth of experience, she has been a speaker, facilitator, ambassador in many roles within the Australia-Asia sphere. Carolyn's insights invoke individuals to develop a greater understanding and deeper engagement with the opportunities and potential challenges that reside within the Asian century. So very interesting for us soon-to-be graduates. In addition, her acumen has enlightened many organisations of the importance of cross-cultural communication and the benefits of a multicultural workforce, something that ACYA very much encourages. So if we could all welcome Dr. Carolyn Hong. And our third and final speaker is Mr. Alistair Nicholas from Weber Shandwick. Alistair Nicholas is a senior advisor in government relations and public affairs practice of Weber Shandwick Australia. He recently returned to Australia after 13 years in senior public affairs positions in China. Immediately prior to returning to Australia, he was Weber Shandwick's Asia Pacific Regional Head of Public Affairs from 2011 to 2013. While in China, he provided strategic advice on government and media relations to a range of multinational corporations, including many of global Fortune 500 companies. He also provided advice to a number of Chinese government agencies on dealing with foreign media and to foreign embassies and foreign government agencies on a range of public affairs and government relations issues in China. Alistair was also the Trade Commissioner in Washington before his time in China. Can we please welcome Mr. Alistair Nicholas? So, the structure of the event, we've asked the speakers to give a little bit of insight about their time working in and with China and their advice for students. And we're going to keep it relatively informal so that there's plenty of opportunities after they introduce themselves and for students such as yourself to ask questions about working in China and working in Australia and working between the two. So, shall we get started? David Thomas, would you like to talk a little bit about your insights?
Thank you, Anna. And thank you everyone for being here this evening and for ACYA for the great job that they do. The Australia-China Youth Association is really important in Australia, and we need to all get behind it and support it and make it bigger and better because it's very relevant. Now, the three of us are good friends, so we're here really to serve you. So I'd like this to be quite informal. I'd like you to understand where we come from so that you know how to question us, but we're not really going to do formal presentations. We're just going to talk to you and answer your questions and deal with your issues. But I think it's important you know a little bit about us, so I'll start, then we'll have Caroline, then we'll have Alistair, and then we'll throw it open. And if you don't have any questions, I'll start prompting you because I can see some really interesting career opportunities developing because of the Australia-China relationship. But just so you know a bit about me, I'm originally from the UK. You probably gathered that from my accent. I lived in England in the 70s and 80s. Oh, actually, and the 60s, I have to say. I moved in my late 20s to Hong Kong. So when I was 28, I moved to Hong Kong. I was very lucky because my dad lived in Hong Kong, and he was the Attorney General in Hong Kong. So he lived in this big house on the Peak. And he divorced his second wife at that time, so he had this whole house to himself. And so he said to me, "Why don't you come and live in one of these bedrooms that we have?" And I was bored in London and thinking that I could develop my career in Hong Kong. So I went to live in Hong Kong, and I lived there for 8 years. And of course, like everyone in Hong Kong, I'd only been there a few minutes, and I'd set up my own business. Very entrepreneurial culture, and I ran a business for 8 years in the investment area, which is what I did in London. I have an institutional investment background from the UK, and then in Hong Kong I worked more in the private, personal, private banking space in Hong Kong, helping high net worth individuals manage their money across Asia. So dealing with very rich people with lots of money and giving them advice about how to invest it in Asia. And then in 1995, so that's nearly 20 years ago, I sold the business in Hong Kong and moved to Australia. And I've been here ever since. Everybody says, why did you come to Australia? And the main answer to that is that I had small kids and I thought Australia would be a good place for them to grow up. And secondly, and of course they have grown up now, one of them's at university, the other one's just doing his HSC now actually. Gosh, yes, he's nearly finished. In fact, I think he has finished. I forgot. But so I've been here for 20 years, and what I've been doing is building bridges between Australia and Asia. So I've taken a lot of Australian companies up to Asia, particularly China, because back in the 80s when I lived there, I could see what was happening in China. I could see how it was beginning to open up. I lived through all that sort of turbulent time in the 80s and 90s. And saw how China was starting to develop, and of course since I've been here that's only just accelerated. So I have about 25 years of dealing with the Chinese, particularly the rich Chinese, and I've got about 20 years now in Australia of working with Australian companies trying to engage with China particularly. So my company's name is Think Global, which is something I'm very passionate about, and as I say, I've been doing this for 20 years, but the changes that have happened in the last 2 years are more than the previous 18. And so we're now in a very exciting phase of the Australia-China relationship, and I think it opens up lots of new careers, new opportunities, new businesses, new disruptive industries coming out of China into Australia and backwards again. And I think it's really exciting for you guys to be thinking about your future career in this Australia-China space. So I've got lots to say about that, which I'll talk about in a minute, but I'd like to introduce you to my friend Caroline.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for coming together, and thank you to ACYA for organising this event and opportunity to address all of you, you're the future leaders and talent in this country. My story is a little bit different from David's because, as you can see, I'm a woman. I'm Asian, he's white, he's British, living in Australia. And we all know that Australia is very multicultural. The population of Australia come from 270 ancestries. If you look at that around this room, how many of you are born overseas? It's quite a lot, yeah. About 1 in 4. And actually, other than English, we all know that Mandarin is the most widely spoken language, but actually there are 400 languages, including indigenous languages. So Australia is very multicultural, but that's not the perception the rest of the world have of us. I came into Australia in sort of unusual circumstances, which is a long story. I always say to people, it'll probably take 20 bottles of wine to tell you the story, but I think it's increased to maybe 100 bottles of wine because it just gets longer and more complex. But it just in a snapshot, I came to Australia in 1976. Many of you probably not born then.
Everyone, no one was born.
1976 was just really only 3 years after the White Australia policy ended. So there was still a bit of remnants of that, although I never really felt it. Maybe I was just blind to it and refused to see. I had also been very young. I went to university in 1976 with a 1 year old. I came in 1976 and made Australia my home. But I went to university in Adelaide. So I went to university in 1978 with a 1 year old baby. So it was very hard. There were women who were saying, you should be at home, what are you doing? Bad mother, etc., etc. But I was very focused. I had a dream. I wanted to be a dentist. So I did everything I could to just ignore the noise and graduated with a Bachelor of Dental Surgery in 1983. So that was the first year. I remember getting 1983 also was a time of recession. So there were not many jobs available, very competitive. I remember getting quite a number of part-time jobs. I actually work 5 jobs in Australia. And I'm a woman, Asian, no internet, don't know how to network, don't even know the word network, I don't even know. Events, no such thing as events. Very hard to find information. There's no such thing as careers now. We don't have forums like this. But anyway, cut long story short, my career progress. It was very interesting because, first of all, I'm Asian, I'm female, but I became a director of a dental clinic in the government sector very quickly. Mainly because 3 years after graduating, I had this aspiration to be not mediocre. I looked around me and said to myself, if I'm going to, I know the realities of the world, so I know that in order to be welcome, I have a foot in the door, I have to stand out. So standing out for me at that time was to maybe acquire another qualification. So I did. So I had a baby, I had 5 different jobs, and also I did part-time studies. And so I was one of, I think, 2 dentists at that time in the 1980s who actually have a business degree. So wow, this dentist, this young woman, she has a business degree, she has a business mind, she has an aspiration to manage dental services. So I got promoted very quickly. I think I got promoted in 7 years, I got promoted 5 times. So, but my first promotion I actually got, the people appealed against me. They said, she's too young, no experience, unknown, how could she get that job as a director? The person who appointed me had a lot of faith in my ability and my maturity, because I was already an older student. So anyway, I won the appeal, and the person who challenged against me was actually the son of the chairman of the health service. So that was another thing that I felt, wow, I've overcome. Anyway, I spent 7 years in public dentistry, as well as in private practice, as well as teaching in university, as well as doing some little dental research, very minute. I couldn't continue that. If I did, my name would be very famous, because the professor who actually went on to complete the research actually discovered a new way of treating root resorption, which is root canal therapy. Have any of you had root canal therapy in your teeth? Probably not, because now everyone has good teeth. Yeah, and then from South Australia, I came to New South Wales. I became, again, I worked in the public sector and as well as the private sector as a dentist. But the real break came when I became the first woman CEO of the Australian Dental Association. When I was appointed as the CEO, 50% were ready for women and ready for Asian face. 50% really don't want me to be there, so it was quite hard. It was actually very hard. In fact, my secretary said to me that, why is it that you performing 10 times better than, or work as hard 10 times output? It's so hard for people to say thank you and acknowledge what you've done. Anyway, I stayed in that role for 3.5 years, and I'm always grateful for that experience, because without that experience, moving from clinical dentistry to become the CEO of my own profession, the Dental Association, there would be no way I could actually progress to the next career. And this story is important to you, because when you leave university and go into workplace, you will see how every experience actually can lead you to unknown paths, which will make sense later in life. Like I always wanted to be a dentist, and then from then I became CEO of my own profession, and then from then on I could become the CEO of a medical body, and I was on contract for 5 years, and they made me stay for 10 years, which was a bit too long. And then from then on, I became the CEO of a new peak body of the SME Association, only for a short period. And then I started my own consultancy and worked with David, mainly with Australia, Asia, Australia, China projects. But my real engagement, my first engagement in China actually started long time ago, before David came to Australia. That was in 1987. My first trip to China. I was the lucky dentist who was picked to join a 3-member delegation invited by the Shandong government up north in China to visit and review their dental services. So that opened my eyes, and from that time on, I've always had a fascination and love for Asia. My work now involves Australia and Asia. I don't work for anyone as an employee. I'm boss. I'm the best boss ever for myself. I sit on company boards, family company boards in Malaysia, and also a Mongolian listed company that's fairly new. And as of today, as you have said earlier, I'm actually president of China HR, which will be of relevance to all of you because we do have a small arm of recruitment and helping people with their competitiveness and getting into the workforce in Asia HR. And as of today, I've launched my business partner and I launched the Sydney School of Protocol for Asians in Australia, mainly to help you lift your competitiveness when you're studying, living, or working in Australia. So I think that's a snapshot of what I do.
Okay. Following on from both David and Caroline, I'd like to thank Honor and Luke and ACYA for organizing this. You can probably pick up my accent is a little bit different as well, so I might give you a little bit of background on why that is the case and how I came to be where I am, but I'd like to also talk to you a little bit about how I found myself to be working in China. So the first thing is that I was born in Kenya, in Africa. My family migrated to Australia in 1969. Or my family came in 1968. They left me in India for a year with my grandfather. The reason was that I was a very bad student in school in Kenya, and I hadn't even learned to read at the age of 8. And my grandfather was given the task of getting me to learn to read. And he would sit there with a ruler, and he would make sure I could read. And I had to read the newspaper every day, I had to read in the story, and I had to summarize it. Could you imagine at the age of 8, having to summarize a news story for your grandfather with a big ruler? So I finally learned to read, so I was allowed to come to Australia. And I arrived in Australia, and Australia was a very different place back then. It was definitely not multicultural. The White Australia policy was only just being dismantled. And in the class that I attended,